to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today what we're going to show you how to do is fix a fairly common problem on a third generation Toyota 4Runner, but this problem could be for any vehicle that has a rear hatch. The problem I'm talking about is the wires that lead from the body to the hatch through a wiring harness. They fatigue over time and they crack and they break, and it will affect the power that you need to go to that rear hatch for your rear wiper motor, for your rear window. What I found on my 98 4Runner recently is that I didn't have working wipers. The front and the rear window weren't working. So I did some research and found that there's a 20 amp fuse that powers that whole circuit. So the fuse was popped and I said, oh, it's just a pop fuse. I replaced it and all of a sudden everything was working again. Well, fast forward a few days later, I find that my rear wiper and my rear window motor isn't working again. So what I remember learning from a Toyota forum, t4r.org, is that over time, when you open that hatch multiple times, it fatigues the wires and they break. So I simply exposed the wires that run from the body to the hatch and saw a broken wire. And that broken wire ends up being the main power from the fuse block to the rear. And it's severed completely, and that's why I don't have a rear working wiper motor or working rear window anymore. What we're going to show you today is how you can go about fixing this issue by taking off a panel off the roof so you can expose the wires better, and then we're going to show butt splicing them together. The one wire that broke isn't the only problem. I found 4 other wires that need some repair. The sheathing is cracked from all the cycling of the opening and closing of the hatch, and to prevent a future problem with those wires potentially grounding out or breaking, I'm going to replace those sections. And what I'm going to use to replace them is I got a wiring harness from a wrecked rig from a PicknPull, and I'm going to pull wires from this harness to repair those wires. Now it's interesting to look at this wiring harness and compare it to mine. This wiring harness has some issues also from the cycling of the door. You can see right here that there's a broken sheathing for this ground wire, this white wire with the black stripe, and then another one of these wires, this green wire, also has a little crack in it, and this is consistent with what I've seen on my truck. This is going to be a problem that all these trucks are going to have at some point. The cycling of the wires where they're bending over and over again, sooner or later they can't bend anymore and they break. They just fatigue out because the copper wires can only cycle through so many bending cycles, and it'll finally just break on you, like happened to me. So let's go out to the truck and let me show you how you can expose these wires to see what I'm talking about. We're using my 2000 4Runner as a reference because I've already done some disassembly with my 98 that has the problem. But the area in question is right in here. The wires bend over and over again and they break. To get better access to the wires, what we're going to do is we're going to go inside and we're going to take this roof panel off. To get the roof panel off, we're first going to take this lens off to expose 4 screws so we can take out this rear dome light, and then we can easily pop this off. To get this lens off, Toyota provides a little area where you can get in with the screwdriver in between the plastic lens and the plastic roof cover and pry and get it out. Just like that. Now you have 4 screws to remove. You can use a JIS screwdriver or whatever screwdriver you have. I'm just going to use my little Milwaukee gun with a Phillips head to zip them out. These aren't going to be really tight. Once you have this disconnected, there's just a little electrical connector you push in from the front here and disconnect it. Just like that. Now to get this panel off, you can use a screwdriver if you want. I recommend using some type of plastic tool. This tool comes from a trim removal set that I bought. You just get it in between here. You get a purchase point and you pull down. This one's fighting me. With this panel out of the way, this exposes the wires to where you can do the repair. When it comes to making the repair, you don't want to make the repair right where the bending happens, you're going to want to butt splice it in an area where it doesn't bend. So I can't just put butt splices right here. I'm going to put them in this area and then this area here in a spot where the wires aren't forced to bend. So now let's go over to my 98 that has the wiring problem, and I'll show you how to disconnect this rubber wiring loom to expose the wires. So all you have to do right here is just take your hand and flip this up, and this is how you can do a quick check to see where you're having a wiring problem. So you can pull it back, and I don't know if the video is going to show it clearly, but these two white wires with a black stripe are cracked. There's a green wire with a yellow stripe that's cracked. There's also a green wire with a white stripe that's cracked. So all those wires need to be replaced. In addition, this gray wire on my 98 is the main power from the fuse block. That's part of the 20 amp circuit, and that one completely severed. So this is the culprit of why I don't have power to my rear window and rear wiper. It's because this wire completely severed. In order to get even more room to work, this little plastic thing will come out. What you do is you just get a screwdriver in here, and you can see where there's little tabs. There's one right here. I could push up and get a little bit of movement, and there's another one right on the left side. You just push it with a screwdriver, and you can see now that gives me more room to work. Another area is this little plastic rectangular thing encompasses this rubber wiring loom. You can pry out on these two pieces, and you could open this up to get more room to work. And you can see how that flops out. That gives you more room to work. As you can see, I already cut this open with the intention that I'm going to be doing butt splices somewhere in here, and maybe one in here. There's only so much room for the wiring when you close the door, so I don't want to stack up all the butt connectors in one spot. And so what I'm going to do for the 5 wires, I'm going to stagger them along this route to where I don't have one big bulky area of butt connectors, if that makes sense. I'm choosing to use butt connectors, but you can choose whatever technique you want to fix the wiring that is broken in this area. As you can see, I already took off the protective wiring cover off this to expose the wires, because on this side I'm going to have to put butt connectors too. So again, I'm going to stagger the butt connectors in this area to where they're not going to be bulky in one spot. This is an interesting thing that is factory from Toyota. This black wire with the white stripe is a ground wire, and they just use a simple type of metal connector to go from a single wire to double wires. And on my rig, both of these ground wires, the sheathing is cracked, so I'm going to have to fix both of these along with the other 2 green wires and this gray wire. So 5 wires total I'm going to be fixing. So some of the tools that I'm going to be using to make my life easier to do the wiring is I have these cool wire strippers from Klein. It actually will show you the different gauges. You can read it, and the way I use this is I always err on the side of being too big. So I go, okay, I know this is probably an 18, but I'm going to try a 16 first. And you see it won't take off the sheathing. So then I go to the next size at 18, try it. Maybe it's even smaller. It looks like it was a 20. So always start off a little bit bigger than you think, and then go down one size at a time to where it pulls off the sheathing to expose the copper wire. The other cool thing that I'm going to use is this crimping butt connector kit. So it has different jaws for different applications. So the jaws that I'm going to be using today are for shrink butt connectors, and the kit actually will tell you what they're for. So these jaws right here say heat shrink butt connector, and so they're nice because you get it on the connector, you ratchet down, and it crimps the butt connector with the wire in it. So if you remember, there was a joining of the 2 ground wires inside here, inside the cab. But what we're going to do is we're going to choose to join the 2 ground wires here to where they split off to 2 different grounds. When you join up wires, you kind of have to combine the size of the wire gauge and pick the right size shrink butt connector. So these blue ones in my kit are for 14 to 16 gauge. So when you double up a 16 gauge wire with an 18 gauge wire, we think that this 14 gauge, the 16 gauge will work. You twist the wires together, get them nice and tight, and then you slide the butt connector over, and then you have to crimp it. And you can see it's kind of tight in here to work, but I'll be able to crimp it. We now have a new ground wire going through this area. It's a non-fatigued section that I pulled from the harness. We butt spliced it here. We fed the wire through here. We butt spliced it here with the single wire connecting here, and then two of them coming out of here to two different grounds. So we use this ratcheting tool to crimp the butt connectors, and they dumb it down for you, and they color code it, and they also show the gauge right here on the jaws, so you can't mess it up. So I used the 16 to 14, which corresponds to the blue, and I just crimped them down on each side. Now I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm going to shrink these butt connectors. These butt connector ends will shrink, and they have an adhesive on the inside that will lock onto the sheathing and provide a weatherproof seal so moisture can't get inside. So here's the heat gun I have for this application. I've used it for many different jobs, and it's really handy. It has an adjustable temperature setting, so you can adjust it to what you want, and this works really well for shrinking the butt connectors because it has this nice little handy reducer to where you can focus the heat exactly where you want, as opposed to, you can see how this has a more broad heat distribution. I can focus it right on the butt connectors with this reducer, which is nice. We'll put links to all these tools we're using in the video description, so if you choose to, you can buy the same tools I bought through Amazon. So what you have to realize is that you could end up taking off the plastic sheathing of the wire you're working on and other wires nearby. So you want to try to isolate it as best as possible. So I'm going to try to push this up away from the other wires, and I'm going to make sure that I don't concentrate the heat with the exposed wire. I'm going to concentrate it on the butt connector itself and watch it shrink over the sheathing. And as you just saw, the shrink butt connector wrapped around the wire, the adhesive heated up, and now it's locking onto the sheathing so no moisture can get in. We're going to do the same procedure on all the other wires I have to fix. We're going to cut the bad section out. We're going to feed in a new section of donor wire that we got from the donor vehicle from the PicknPull. We're going to butt connect them, and then we're going to shrink them and do all 5 wires to prevent another problem happening down the road. Like, say if you're four-wheeling, all of a sudden you lose power to your rear window. It wouldn't be convenient, right? You want a working rear window so you can get access and do other things, get some airflow. So it's just going to prevent a future problem for me by going ahead and fixing the wires that I know are already fatigued and are probably ready to break too, like this power wire that comes from the 20 amp circuit. So we're going to do the rest of them just like we showed. We did find that even though I have this rubber wire sheathing cut pretty far, it's still a little bit difficult to push the wires through because I didn't want to cut this completely and split it. So we're just tying the replacement wire to the old wire, and I'm just using a regular square knot. You could use whatever knot you want, and then get it sort of tight. You got this loose end, feed it in first, and then find the wire that you need to replace on the other side, which is the green wire with the yellow stripe. And I'm pulling it through, and you can see it pulled it through kind of nicely. And so now I have my new wire ran through. We did that with some other wires. Another thing that we noticed is that when you're shrinking the butt connectors, you can make one side a little bit easier. Instead of cutting it to the perfect length that you need, leave it a little long so you can pull the wire down and separate it from the other wires easier to get the heat where you need it, so you won't be affecting the other wires potentially and maybe melting the sheathing of a wire you don't want to mess with. So if you leave the wire a little bit loose before you cut it to the perfect length to do the opposite butt connecting, it'll make at least one side a little easier to separate it from the other wire so you don't inadvertently burn off the sheathing of a wire you don't want to do that to. See how we did this with the staggering of the butt connectors. We put one as close as we felt comfortable to the headliner, and then we put one that would be in between two of the bigger butt connectors, and then we put a fourth here. So when we bundle them up, they're going to be less bulky as opposed to if we stack them all right next to each other. And then when we go to the opposite side, we did the same thing. We put them all in this area. So we started one really close to here. We put another one in between two of the bigger butt connectors, and then we put a fourth one here. So now we have the whole repair done. The moment of truth now is we're going to turn the ignition key on and see if I have a working rear wiper and a working rear window. Let's check it out. Okay, we'll do the rear window first. Hey, working rear window. Let's go up. That's nice. Let's try the wiper. Hey, working rear wiper. Woohoo! Let's see if the intermittent function works. Hey, the intermittent function works too, so it's all working. So when it comes to getting this rubber wiring loom around the little plastic piece that is a passageway through the roof, you want to get this disconnected again with using your little screwdriver. And I found it's easier to put this plastic piece on here first and then plug it in, because it's a little bit of a fight. So you have to get the rubber seal all the way around, just like this. So you see that this slides over the little lip here and it fits over. Then once you get that, then you snap it in like that. And same thing, this is the same style over here. If you decided to disconnect it out here, you would do the same thing. Get the plastic piece separated from the hatch, get the rubber grommet around it first, and then plug it in. So now all I have to do is I'm just going to take some black tape and I'm going to wrap this up, and then I'm going to have to go in here and I'm going to wrap up the wires with some black tape too. So I wrapped the wiring inside the vehicle with black tape, and then there's this little plastic piece that plugs into the roof that allows you to tape the wiring loom up against the roof. So I got a couple free pieces of black tape. I slid them in between the roof and the little plastic holder, and then I taped it in place and cinched it up tight. So now it's really tight up against the roof. For here, what I did is I first took individual strips and I closed up the cut, and then after I got it all closed up with little individual strips, then I started on this end and I just wrapped it all the way through to here, and then I pushed the wiring loom into this connector and snapped it in place to where it holds it nicely to the hatch. We noticed one of these plastic connectors for the roof trim piece broke. It's supposed to separate here and not break here, so one of them broke. This might happen to you. This is pretty easy fix. You could just go to a PicknPull and pick up one of these, no problem, because these are always plentiful at a PicknPull. People aren't going to the PicknPull to grab these. They're going to grab the engine or an e-locker or something like that. So it's still going to work sort of. So just plug it back in, and then you got to get the trim piece in first before you get the light in. You line up the connectors and make sure the plug for your dome light is going through the hole. Line them up and then snap it in place. There we go. So now that you got your trim piece in, you get your light connected. So you got to get the connector connected here and then get your 4 screws in. Wouldn't hurt to just double check that it works, and it works. And now we'll just get our lens put back in place. So I usually start with this single nub here. I go in on this side first, slide it in, then push it in place. Just like so. We're all done. Success. Like my hair? This is a product of not being able to get a haircut for a long time. Pretty shaggy. I could have been Shaggy's double on Scooby-Doo. All right, we're all done with this job, and as you saw, it's not really hard. It's just a little tedious because you have to take your time and make sure you get your butt connectors in the right spot to where the wiring loom isn't going to be too bulky. So take your time and space out the butt connectors for however many wires you have to repair. You might find when you have a problem that it's just maybe one wire. I found that I actually had 5 wires that needed fixing, and it's better to fix them now than wait for it to become a problem. This was done on a 3rd generation Toyota 4Runner, but I have a feeling that any vehicle with a rear hatch that is used a lot, that maybe this could happen to you. So the previous owner of my 98 4Runner had a big dog. I think it was a golden retriever. I saw evidence of it everywhere inside the back of the rig. There was tons of dog hair and had a really gnarly, musty smell to the inside. So they transported that dog in the back on a lot of trips. And so even though my truck only has around 150,000 miles on it, I bet that that rear hatch was open and closed hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe more than most people would open and close it, whether they're opening it up to put groceries back there or gear. You might find, even though your truck has a lot of miles on it, you might not have a wiring problem just yet. But if you have the situation that I have, that you have a non-working rear window, a non-working rear wiper or wiper washer, then check the fuse. But if the fuse blew, it might have blown for a reason, like the wire grounded out. So all you got to do is lift up that little rubber grommet and expose the wires and take a look. If you see that a wire is broken or a wire is exposed because the sheathing cracked over time, then it's time to get in there and fix it like we showed you. There's also other wiring areas that get bent over and over the lifetime of the vehicle, and that's the power going to the doors. But we haven't really heard of a problem with power going to your windows or your power door locks with these rigs. But we have heard of wires breaking or becoming frayed in that hatch area. What we think is the doors aren't really ever going to be a problem for you, but that rear hatch most likely will at some point in the life of your 4Runner if you keep it long enough. Or if it's another type of vehicle that has a hatch and you open it up and close it enough times, finally those wires are going to fatigue and they're going to break on you. So you can use the techniques we used in this video to fix your other model vehicle and get it done and get a working rear window or working rear wiper again. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We will be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods. And happy wrenching, people. Peace out. Bye-bye.